What I'm doing is reading my book Erebus from start to finish for the audio recording, for those who like to listen to books rather than, well, perhaps they read them as well, but certainly it's a listening experience is what I'm doing today.
Whatever the possible reasons for their fate, the brutality of their predicament, once they'd abandoned the ships, is appalling to imagine. As the masts of the ships that had been their home for 3 years disappeared from sight behind them, what possible hope could have kept them going? There was at best a weak sun above them and hard-packed snow and ice beneath, over which heavily laden sledges had to be hauled. At least on the ships, they would have had some protection from the freezing winds. On the low, exposed, treeless island, the cold must have been intolerable.
The book is about a ship called the Erebus, which in the 1840s went first of all down to the Antarctic, where it spent 4 years in an extraordinary adventurous expedition going in and out of the ice, avoiding being crushed by icebergs. Went furthest south that any sailing ship's ever been in history. Then came back and was chosen to be the flagship of Sir John Franklin's expedition to the Northwest Passage in 1846. And that was a total disaster. The ships all disappeared. No one knew what happened to them. 128 men were lost. And it became one of the great disasters of naval history. About 4 years ago now, they discovered the hull of HMS Erebus under the water in the Canadian Arctic. So I've called my book Erebus the story of a ship, because it's really this remarkable ship that's, I don't think, ever been given enough credit in history for what it achieved and for its sad and dramatic end.
Where did the will to live come from? Was there a single inspirational figure whose vision kept them going? Did Francis Crozier rise to the occasion and become that man? What hopes were raised when they encountered a party of Inuit, only to see them disappear after a brief exchange? Was that the moment they lost all hope, or had it gone long before? One hopes that the determination to survive, inbuilt in us all, was enough to stave off despair. But there's no way round it. Theirs was a dreadful way to die.
I liked the drama of the story. I liked the fact that it was set in a period when Britain had sort of had a break from fighting wars and actually had a navy which could go off and try and explore the world. And there was a great deal of feeling that at last it was possible to know how the world worked, all the science behind it, the natural history behind it. These were great times, and this ship represented that period, a period when there were high hopes, but at the same time, in the end, they couldn't control the world, and they certainly couldn't control nature. And so what happened to the ship was a kind of reversal of pride and ambition and acceptance of the power of nature over humans.
It could be argued that lives might have been saved if rescue expeditions had been sent out earlier, that better mapping would have helped both them and their searchers, and that Franklin and the Admiralty should have attached more importance to the leaving of cairns indicating their route. There are those who blame Crozier for leading the survivors in the wrong direction after leaving the ship, despite his knowing that there were supplies left at Fiore Beach by the Parry expedition in 1825. Supplies that were found to be perfectly good by a party 45 years later. Instead, he headed south and west for one of the most difficult and dangerous rivers on the mainland, and a Hudson's Bay post that was 1,250 miles away.
One of the most difficult things in a book like this is there are many voices, there are many characters, and a number of them are very, very important in carrying our story along. People who kept diaries on long voyages, Sir John Franklin himself, and distinguishing them one from the other is quite a challenge. I've tried to give them all characters. I sort of read where they've come from and all that, and tried to add a hint of an accent that will make it different, a delivery that will make them stand out differently. I feel I can do that when I'm reading it aloud. I can emphasize the excitement and the sensation of what is happening on board ship. Yeah, there's quite a sort of gallery of characters in there, and I think it had to be like that. If you just read it absolutely flat, what they'd said, you're missing a real opportunity to try and bring some of these characters to life. And occasionally when I've been reading, I really get quite moved actually. There's some of the letters home and some of the letters from the parents of people who've been on the ships or people who've lost friends on the ships. They're very, very moving. I suddenly found I'm in their place. I've gone back 170 years and I'm feeling the sort of what they're feeling at the time. It's quite moving sometimes.
Crozier's options were few. Men struggling with sledges carrying food and supplies would have found it hard work in any direction, and Fury Beach was some way off. It's thought they took 3 boats with them. Hobson found one of them on King William Island, and the Inuit said they'd found 2 others. So the plan could well have been to find open water as soon as possible, where boats would have been a more comfortable and much faster means of transport. The only way we will ever know what precisely was going on through the minds of those leading the expedition would be if some new documentary evidence comes to light. The Royal Navy was punctilious in keeping records, logbooks kept by the captain and mate, and sick books kept by the ship's surgeon would have been among those routinely maintained on Erebus and Terror, and, unless discipline had completely broken down, they would have been maintained to the end.
What you will get from listening to it in audio is a sense of the drama, and the drama which drew me to the book, and the drama which I can sort of play as I read it, which, you know, is not necessarily there in the same way on the page. I want this to be not just a sort of an account of 2 voyages and the history of a ship. I want it to be a story and a narrative that really draws people along to its ultimately disastrous end and keeps drawing you in.
The marine archaeologist Ryan Harris has pointed out that the ship's logs were written on linen-based paper that could have survived in the icy water. There are some who hold out hopes that these documents will be found on the ships. There are others who fear that the Inuit, who never had papers themselves, would simply have discarded any records they came across. Most likely, they were blown away long ago. But history abhors a vacuum, and as long as we don't know, there will always be those who want to know. A disaster of this scale looks for an explanation of equal magnitude. They must not have died in vain.